In 2001, Steve Jobs promised that this specific machine would force us to fundamentally redesign human cities. He literally stated that cities would be architected around it.
Right, the hype was just, it was absolute.
But by 2009, that exact same machine was the central punchline in a Kevin James mall cop movie. Welcome to Peak to Dust. You are joining us for another high-stakes investigation into the rise and fall of the giants of history. Today, we are opening a forensic post-mortem on the Segway.
We are looking at a device backed by the most brilliant minds and, frankly, the deepest pockets in Silicon Valley. A machine that vowed to eradicate the automobile and rewrite human infrastructure from the ground up.
But ultimately collapsed into a discontinued novelty.
Exactly. The trajectory we are analyzing today is a spectacular collision between unparalleled engineering hubris and unforgiving market reality. Our objective is to systematically break down how a technological titan, armed with virtually unprecedented capital and a flawless engineering pedigree, managed to fail so comprehensively.
And we are building this investigation on a massive stack of evidence for you today. We're pulling from early patent records, financial data, investigative tech journalism from outlets like Wired and TechCrunch, and a long trail of documented executive statements spanning from the initial hype in 1999 all the way to the final grim autopsy in 2020.
And we are not looking at this as some quirky gadget from the early 2000s. We are treating this as a massive corporate failure that highlights the extreme danger of isolated innovation.
To understand the sheer altitude of this peak, we really have to start with the architect of the machine. The Segway did not start in a Silicon Valley garage with a couple of coders looking to disrupt skateboarding.
No, not at all.
It started in the absolute highest echelons of medical innovation with a man named Dean Kamen.
You cannot separate the absolute unwavering confidence that investors had in the Segway from the pedigree of Dean Kamen. When you look at the historical record, Kamen was never a toy maker. He was, and honestly remains, an undeniable genius in the medical field. By the time he was in his 20s, he had already achieved a monumental breakthrough, the autosyringe.
Let's actually pause and explain the mechanics of the autosyringe.
Yeah.
Because it perfectly contextualizes why the financial world trusted him implicitly later on. Before Kamen, if you needed continuous medication, say insulin or certain chemotherapies, you were tethered to an IV pole in a hospital.
Right, because delivering a steady, microscopic dose of a highly potent drug required massive stationary hospital equipment. You couldn't move.
Exactly. But Kamen engineered the first wearable, portable drug infusion pump.
He miniaturized the delivery system so precisely that it could continuously administer microdoses of medication while the patient went about their daily life. I mean, he essentially built a mechanical equivalent of a functioning biological organ that people could just wear.
That device alone freed thousands of patients from full-time hospitalization.
It did, and he didn't stop there. In his 30s, he applied a similar miniaturization and automation philosophy to perfect a portable dialysis machine, completely liberating users from constant, exhausting trips to specialized medical centers. He was also highly instrumental in developing the flexible heart stent.
So when Dean Kamen walks into a boardroom in the late 1990s and says he has a revolutionary idea that will change the world, the venture capitalists aren't rolling their eyes. They're listening with a blank checkbook.
Precisely. His entire track record was built on successfully disrupting massive healthcare paradigms and literally saving lives. He had a documented history of solving the unsolvable.
Which is exactly how the technological foundation of the Segway was born. It didn't begin as a consumer vehicle.
No, it began as a medical device in the 1990s known as the IB-8. Revealed in 1999, the IB-8 was a multi-terrain self-balancing wheelchair, and the engineering partnerships behind it were formidable. Kamen developed it in conjunction with BAE Systems.
BAE Systems, the defense contractor.
Yes. A massive aerospace and defense contractor, along with Sumitomo Precision Products and the University of Plymouth.
The involvement of an aerospace contractor like BAE Systems is a massive tell. I mean, you don't bring in aerospace engineers to build a standard wheelchair.
You bring them in because the IBIT was designed to defy gravity. It was a six-wheeled machine with incredible flexibility and agility. It could navigate sand, power through gravel, and most astonishingly climb standard staircases.
That alone is incredible for a wheelchair.
It is. But its signature feature was its ability to rear up and balance perfectly on two wheels, elevating the user so they could be at eye level with a standing person. Kamen actually nicknamed the IBIT project Fred in honor of the famed dancer Fred Astaire because of how gracefully the machine could move and balance its human partner.
The leap from a multi-terrain wheelchair to a commuter vehicle seems obvious in hindsight, right? During the development of Fred, Camen's team realized that if they could build a self-balancing platform capable of elevating a person in a heavy wheelchair, they could easily strip away the chair component.
Exactly. They could take that same core gyroscopic balancing technology and mount it on a standalone platform for a general use vehicle.
That realization birthed the project that would eventually become the Segway. In keeping with the naming convention, they codenamed this new standalone vehicle Ginger, a direct nod to Fred Astaire's legendary dance partner Ginger Rogers.
But transitioning the technology from Fred to Ginger required engineering what can only be described as an apex machine. The mechanics of the original Segway were an absolute marvel of modern physics and computer science.
The heart of the machine was a technology Camen's team patented under the term dynamic stabilization. Break down dynamic stabilization for us. What was actually happening inside the base of that machine when someone stepped onto it?
We are talking about a highly complex, tightly packed cluster of aviation-grade components. It housed a network of solid-state gyroscopes, an accelerometer, tilt sensors, and incredibly sophisticated proprietary software. When a human stepped onto the platform, these sensors began monitoring the rider's center of gravity more than 100 times per second.
Think about that metric for a moment. 100 times per second. The machine is analyzing and reacting to the micro shifts in human posture significantly faster than the human brain can even process conscious thought.
And it had to, because the Segway represented an incredible leap forward in consumer technology. It was the first mass-market consumer application of true drive-by-wire technology.
Which is a terrifying concept if you really think about what drive-by-wire meant in 2001.
Yeah.
In a traditional car or even a bicycle at that time, everything was mechanical.
Right, there were physical connections.
Yeah, if you press the brake pedal, a steel cable physically pulled a caliper, or hydraulic fluid physically forced a pad against a radar. There was a physical linkage keeping you safe.
But the Segway had zero mechanical linkages for control. There were no brakes. There was no engine in the traditional sense. There was no throttle, no gear shift, and no steering wheel.
Nothing to grab onto if the system failed.
Nothing. The drive-by-wire system meant that software, and software alone, made the machine turn, accelerate, and stop. The data from the gyroscopes was fed into dual redundant microprocessors, which then sent commands to brushless DC electric motors powered by advanced battery chemistry. Initially, this was nickel metal hydride, and later they moved to lithium-ion.
The rider simply shifted their body weight forward to move, shifted backward to stop or reverse, and pushed a handlebar left or right to steer.
Yeah.
If we break this mechanism down to its absolute core, it is a direct mechanical analog to the human biological vestibular system.
It really is.
Think about how you walk. When you stand up straight and lean forward, you are essentially throwing yourself out of balance. You are falling. But you don't hit the ground. Why? Because the fluid in your inner ear shifts, detecting the change in your center of gravity.
Yes.
It sends a lightning-fast neurological signal to your brain, which instantly commands your leg muscles to step forward and catch your mass.
And Dean Kamen's engineering team managed to seamlessly translate the fluid of the human inner ear into solid-state microprocessors and gyroscopes. And they translated the human leg muscles into highly responsive brushless electric motors. It is a breathtaking mechanical emulation of human biology.
Breathtaking is the exact right word, and Kamen was acutely aware of how profound this invention was. But that awareness morphed into an extreme, isolating paranoia that would ultimately doom the project.
It did. Because of the perceived immense value of dynamic stabilization, the development of Ginger was shrouded in a cult of absolute secrecy. The level of secrecy went far beyond standard corporate non-disclosure agreements.
He was legitimately terrified someone would steal it.
Kamen suffered from intense inventor's paranoia. He genuinely believed that Japanese automakers or competing Silicon Valley tech firms were actively trying to steal the fundamental design. At the Segway headquarters in Bedford, New Hampshire, the security protocols were draconian.
Strict NDAs were mandatory for anyone who even walked into the building, right?
Yes, but it went further than that. The windows of the engineering facility were completely blacked out. The source documents reveal that in some specific rooms, employees literally sealed the blinds to the window frames with heavy tape so that absolutely no one could peek through the narrow gaps from the outside.
I mean, it sounds like a military black site, not a tech startup.
That's how they operated. When engineers had to transport the prototypes outside of the secured zones, they were forced to hide the machines inside heavy, unmarked plywood crates. Nobody could know what the physical form of the machine looked like.
This level of extreme isolation is critical to our investigation because it perfectly sets the stage for the billion-dollar hype machine that followed. You cannot build a product in a vacuum without the outside world projecting its own fantasies onto it.
Especially when that vacuum is punctured.
Exactly. And that projection started with a massive leak. In January 2001, a book proposal detailing the invention and the massive financial backing of Ginger was leaked to a website called inside.com.
The crucial detail of this leak is that the author of the book proposal did not actually reveal what the device was. They only described the pedigree of the inventor, the sheer amount of money involved, and the reactions of the people who had seen it.
That vacuum of actual information ignited a global frenzy of speculation. The internet, which was still relatively young in terms of mass global communication, essentially caught fire.
On engineering and technology forums, particularly a prominent robotics forum called Chief Delphi, the rumors were wild and completely unmoored from reality. Users were desperately trying to parse the clues, speculating that IT, as the device was sometimes ominously called, was a magnetic anti-gravity vehicle.
Or a personal hovercraft powered by hydrogen fuel cells.
The forum archives from that era are fascinating. One documented post on Chief Delphi insisted with absolute certainty, quote, "On the record, it's a Segway with a Stirling engine. I am 110% sure of that. Don't even bother questioning it," end quote.
People were aggressively debating how Stirling engines, which, by the way, are heat engines that were invented all the way back in 1816, could theoretically be miniaturized to power this mysterious world-changing device. The absolute lack of concrete data allowed the public imagination to run completely rampant.
But the hysteria wasn't limited to anonymous engineering nerds on message boards. The Silicon Valley elite, the titans of the tech industry who were actually granted highly restricted early access to the prototypes, were publicly prophesying a complete restructuring of human society.
To understand the scale of the peak, we have to look at the documented statements from these individuals. These weren't casual endorsements.
No. The quotes from this era are staggering in their absolute, unwavering certainty. Apple co-founder Steve Jobs, a man not known for easily praising other people's hardware, stated that the invention would be as big a deal as the PC. He took it a step further and predicted that human cities would literally be architected around the device.
And Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, personally tested the device and declared it, quote, "a product so revolutionary you'll have no problem selling it."
And then you have John Doerr, the legendary venture capitalist at Kleiner Perkins. This is a man who had already backed historical behemoths like Amazon and Google. Doerr confidently predicted that Segway would be the fastest company in history to hit $1 billion in sales. He went on the record stating that the Segway would be more important than the internet itself.
Let's stop and really look at that statement. More important than the internet. That supreme confidence translated directly into a massive capital influx. It created a financial zenith for Segway before a single unit was ever manufactured for the public.
The venture capital, it flowed like water. Doerr's firm, Kleiner Perkins, invested $38 million directly into Kamen's startup. At the time, it was widely reported across financial media as the largest single investment in Kleiner Perkins' storied history.
Incredible.
In total, during the spring of 2000, Kamen raised roughly $90 million to $100 million in capital.
And because of his immense leverage and the intense, almost desperate demand from investors to back the project, Kamen commanded unheard of terms. He retained between 75 and 85% ownership of the company. That massive funding round gave Segway LLC a preposterous pre-launch valuation of roughly $650 million.
Without a single sale.
I have to interject here because this is where the foundational cracks start to form. Let's critically examine this era of development. We have a brain trust consisting of the world's most successful venture capitalists and an undeniable, prudent engineering genius. They have secured $100 million in cash.
Right.
But they have sealed themselves inside a blacked-out facility, terrified of the outside world. Did the absolute secrecy, driven entirely by Kamen's paranoia, artificially inflate the financial hype while simultaneously destroying the company's ability to conduct actual, meaningful market research?
It absolutely did.
The sources show Kamen actually belittled his own marketing department, calling them the three marketeers. By silencing the people whose job it was to understand the consumer, did they permanently blind themselves to the economic reality waiting outside those plywood crates?
The evidence strongly points to yes. If you look at retrospective interviews with early employees, they all noted a fatal flaw. You cannot do effective real-world product testing if you are terrified to take the product outside.
They're just driving it around the office.
Exactly.
Huh.
The machine worked flawlessly while gliding around the smooth, flat, environmentally controlled environment of a high-tech engineering office. But because they are entirely isolated from the public, they never gauged price tolerance. They never tested infrastructural compatibility on broken sidewalks or steep, uneven curbs.
And crucially, they never tested the social perception of the device.
They operated on a dangerous assumption. Because the technological innovation was profound, they assumed the societal implementation would be automatic.
But assumptions made in a blacked-out engineering lab shatter the second you put a machine in front of a live television audience. Which brings us to the pivot. The exact moment the curtain was pulled back and the hype machine violently collided with reality. December 3, 2001.
After months of breathless global speculation, the blackout curtains were finally removed. Dean Kamen appeared live on the ABC News morning television program, Good Morning America. He stood in Bryant Park in New York City and officially unveiled the Segway personal transporter to the world.
And the reaction was an immediate, palpable, devastating anticlimax. Imagine being a viewer that morning. You've been told by Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos that cities will be redesigned. You're expecting a magnetic hovercraft, a cold fusion jetpack, the sheet is pulled away, and the world sees a scooter.
A very advanced scooter, but yes.
Visually, structurally, it's a scooter with a thick base and a handlebar. Good Morning America co-host Diane Sawyer was standing right there, and her documented reaction upon seeing it for the first time was a bewildered, "That's it, that can't be it."
That psychological whiplash from the public was severe, but it was immediately compounded by a secondary, fatal blow, the sticker shock. When the Segway finally hit the market for consumers in late 2002, the initial retail price was $4,950.
And later on, specific, rugged, or specialized models would reach up to $10,000. We need to contextualize that price. In 2002, $5,000 was not a casual luxury purchase. $5,000 was the price of a highly reliable, used Honda Civic.
It was a massive barrier to entry.
Why was a two-wheeled open-air transporter that couldn't even shield you from the rain priced so astronomically high?
The exorbitant cost was a direct, inescapable result of the engineering compromises Kamen absolutely refused to make. The Segway was fundamentally over-engineered for a consumer market. To achieve that flawless medical-grade dynamic stabilization, it utilized highly expensive aviation-grade components for its gyroscopes and tilt sensors.
You don't need aerospace parts to roll down a sidewalk.
No, but Kamen insisted on perfection.
And the power source wasn't cheap either.
Not at all. It relied on heavy, highly expensive nickel-metal hydride, or NiMH, battery arrays. Lithium-ion technology wasn't mature enough or cheap enough at that specific moment to be utilized at scale, so they were stuck with heavy, costly power cells.
Plus, they were manufacturing it in the U.S., right?
Crucially, yes. Kamen was adamant about manufacturing the vehicles domestically at their facility in Bedford, New Hampshire, rather than utilizing significantly cheaper overseas manufacturing hubs. The combined cost of aviation materials, complex solid-state sensors, and domestic labor made it financially impossible to bring the retail price down to a consumer-friendly $1,000 without taking massive, unsustainable losses on every unit.
Jim Norrod, who later served as CEO, candidly admitted that the products were priced far too high for the market, but stated they desperately needed the high margins just to keep the company's lights on. This uncompromising pricing strategy completely shattered the sales illusion they had built in their isolated vacuum.
Let's look at the delta between the executive predictions and the grim reality. Dean Kamen had grandly, publicly predicted that Segway would be producing 10,000 units a week. He stated they would effectively sell 500,000 units a year by the end of their second year on the market.
500,000 a year. And the reality?
The reality was a bloodbath. Segway sold fewer than 20,000 units in its first 4 years combined.
Less than 20,000 units.
In 4 years.
By late 2008, nearly 7 years after its highly publicized launch, cumulative global sales had only reached roughly 30,000 units.
This raises a fundamental, sobering question about the nature of venture capital and technological forecasting. How did this specific brain trust, Doerr, Jobs, Bezos, Kamen, completely misread the economic reality of the average consumer?
It is baffling when you look at their track records.
Why did they genuinely believe that an everyday commuter, someone taking the subway to an office building, would eagerly spend the equivalent of a used car on a device that offered zero protection from the rain, no climate control, and absolutely no cargo space? They misread the market because they fell deeply in love with the elegance of their own engineering solution, and they completely ignored the messy, unpredictable reality of human behavior and urban infrastructure. They weren't wrong about the problem itself. They accurately identified a massive friction point in urban transit, something urban planners call the last mile gap.
Let's define the last mile gap for you, because it's crucial to understanding what the Segway was supposed to fix. The last mile is the distance between a public transit stop, like a bus stop or a train station, and a person's actual final destination, like their office or apartment.
Right, the final stretch of the commute.
If a train station is 2 miles from your office, you aren't going to walk that in a suit in the middle of summer. That gap deters public transit use and encourages people to just drive their personal cars the whole way. The Segway was perfectly designed, on paper, to be the ultimate frictionless solution to this last mile paradox.
On paper, yes. But the machine completely failed its physical environment. When you look at the physical specifications of the device versus the reality of a city, the intended use case collapses immediately. The original Segway weighed between 80 to 100 pounds, depending on the model and battery.
Put yourself in the shoes of that commuter. Imagine your morning routine. You ride your 100-pound Segway to the subway entrance. Now what? You cannot feasibly deadlift a 100-pound, awkwardly shaped machine down a steep flight of concrete stairs.
No, it's impossible.
You certainly can't lug it onto a crowded train car during rush hour. It becomes an immovable anchor the second you hit an architectural barrier.
Furthermore, the Segway required both hands firmly on the handlebars to operate safely. The drive-by-wire system needed constant symmetrical input. This seems like a minor ergonomic detail until you place the machine in a real living city.
Because it meant the rider could not hold an umbrella in a rainstorm.
Exactly. They could not hold a cup of coffee. They could not even easily carry a briefcase or a messenger bag unless it was awkwardly strapped to the machine's front post, which would throw off the center of gravity. The machine demanded total, unyielding physical commitment for a journey that was supposed to be a casual, effortless commute.
And beyond the physical limitations placed on the rider, there was the intense hostility of the environment itself. The world was not paved in smooth, flat concrete. Interestingly, before the massive launch, Jeff Bezos had actually warned Cayman about this exact issue.
He did. He reviewed the product and explicitly stated that the United States regulatory environment would be, quote, too hostile for a rollout of this nature. He suggested they launch in a single, highly controlled market, perhaps a closed campus city or a specific tech hub to test the waters.
But Cayman completely ignored this advice and instead launched a nationwide, highly aggressive lobbying effort to force the machine onto sidewalks.
And the result of launching blindly into the existing unprepared infrastructure was an immediate and severe legal and safety backlash. The Segway instantly became a regulatory nightmare for city councils across the globe. Think about the physics of the machine. It was a motorized device capable of speeds up to 12.5 miles per hour. It was carrying a combined weight of an adult human and a 100-pound machine. Cities simply did not know where it belonged.
It was too dangerous for the sidewalk, but too vulnerable for the street.
Exactly. It was banned outright from sidewalks in major municipalities like San Francisco almost immediately. Later, it faced severe restrictions or total bans in dense European tourist hubs like Prague and Barcelona, where narrow medieval streets made it a massive hazard.
The medical community also sounded the alarm. The American Academy of Pediatrics and the Consumers Union issued severe, documented pushback regarding the dangers of the Segway. They pointed out the immense danger of a heavy, fast, motorized machine sharing tight, unprotected space with pedestrians, unpredictable children, and the elderly.
The medical pushback was grounded in basic physics. A pedestrian collision with a 100-pound machine plus a 180-pound rider traveling at 12.5 miles per hour is not a minor bump. It is a serious kinetic impact capable of causing severe trauma, broken bones, or worse.
And the necessary infrastructure to safely house a vehicle like this specifically, miles of protected, grade-separated bike lanes, was an absolute rarity in American cities in 2001. You can frame the Segway as the ultimate orphan technology.
That's a very accurate way to put it.
It was a staggering engineering marvel, a device that flawlessly mimicked human biology, but it was fundamentally homeless. It was too wide, too fast, and too heavy to safely share the sidewalk with a walking pedestrian. Yet it was far too slow, and the rider was far too exposed and vulnerable to mix with car and truck traffic on the road. It was a machine built for a utopian world that simply did not yet exist.
And because it had no natural home, no protected infrastructure, and a price tag that only the wealthy could afford, the cultural perception of the Segway began to warp drastically. We entered the phase of the fall marked by intense cultural stigma, catastrophic mechanical recalls, and high-profile disasters.
The vehicle that was intended to be the sleek, futuristic, world-changing transport for early tech adopters rapidly devolving into a cruel cultural punchline. The destruction of the brand identity was absolute. Even early employees, looking back, admitted that the machine suffered from a severe, inescapable dork factor.
It was an aesthetic issue as much as an engineering one. It was virtually impossible to look cool or dignified while standing rigidly upright, feet planted shoulder-width apart, wearing a mandatory safety helmet, gliding awkwardly down a street while towering over pedestrians.
This stigma was quickly cemented by pop culture, which is always the final nail in the coffin for a consumer product. The 2009 hit film Paul Blart. Mall Cop used the Segway as a central defining comedic prop. That movie permanently associated the machine not with urban pioneers, but with inept, bumbling security guards.
And it wasn't just that movie. Weird Al Yankovic featured it prominently in his parody music video, White and Nerdy, literally using the Segway as the visual definition of uncool. It became a running, humiliating gag in the critically acclaimed television series Arrested Development.
When a premium $5,000 product becomes a universal symbol of extreme nerdiness and public mockery, the consumer market completely evaporates. People, especially status-conscious early adopters, will not spend thousands of dollars to be publicly ridiculed on their morning commute.
Absolutely not. But the brand suffered from something far more dangerous than just jokes. It suffered from systemic, mechanical failures that undermined its absolute core promise of safety. Remember, this was a drive-by-wire machine. If the software fails, the rider falls. In September 2003, Segway was forced to issue a devastating recall of all 6,000 units that had been manufactured up to that point.
A total 100% recall of every single machine on the market. Break down the mechanics of this failure for us. What exactly was the critical glitch?
It was a terrifying software glitch involving how the microprocessors read the battery voltage. If a rider ignored the low battery warnings and pushed the machine to its limit, the voltage would suddenly drop. The gyroscopes and the software would misinterpret this sudden lack of power.
So they wouldn't just shut down.
No, instead of gracefully decelerating the motors to safely lower the rider to a stop, the system would panic. It would unexpectedly throw the motors into reverse to try and catch a balance point that no longer existed. This violent reversal would pitch the rider violently over the handlebars and onto the ground.
Yeah, it is a catastrophic failure for a device predicated entirely on perfect balance.
They had to urgently issue a software patch, version 12.0, to ensure the machine would safely slow down and stop instead of reversing. But the psychological damage to the brand was done. And incredibly, it happened again. In 2006, Segway had to issue another massive recall, this time for 23,500 units, due to a glitch in the speed limiter.
Another mass recall.
Yes. This glitch also posed a severe fall hazard, and this time there were documented injuries, including broken bones and head traumas, resulting from riders being unexpectedly pitched off the platforms.
And these safety hazards weren't just hidden in consumer safety reports. They were broadcast to the entire world through a series of incredibly high-profile, highly embarrassing accidents involving massive public figures.
The media coverage of these accidents was relentless and incredibly damaging. In 2003, President George W. Bush was photographed and filmed taking a massive tumble off a Segway while trying to ride it on his family estate in Kennebunkport, Maine.
The image of the leader of the free world eating dirt on a machine touted as infallible was a PR nightmare.
It was. In 2007, British journalist and television personality Piers Morgan fell off a Segway in California, breaking 3 ribs. Even years later, the curse continued. In 2015, during the World Athletics Championships in Beijing, a cameraman named Song Tao lost control of his Segway after clipping a metal rail along the track. The machine veered out of control and violently ran over Olympic gold medalist Usain Bolt from behind,
taking down the fastest man in the world on live global television. But the most devastating blow to the company's image wasn't a celebrity stumble or a viral blooper. It was a fatal, profound tragedy that struck the absolute highest level of the company's leadership.
Yes. This is where the story turns incredibly dark. In December 2009, British millionaire entrepreneur and philanthropist James Jimmy Heselden purchased Segway Inc. directly from Dean Kamen. Heselden was a brilliant, self-made man who had made a massive fortune inventing the Hesco bastion, a wire cage wall system used extensively for military fortifications and flood protection.
So he was a serious player.
Very serious. He believed in the underlying technology of the Segway and believed his operational expertise could turn the struggling company around.
But his tenure was tragically short.
Just 10 months after buying the company in September 2010, Heselden was riding a rugged cross-country version of the Segway, the By-2, near his sprawling estate in West Yorkshire, England. According to the coroner and police reports, he was maneuvering along a narrow, rugged path to allow a dog walker to pass. He lost control of the machine and plunged 30 feet over a cliff, falling into the River Wharfe. He was 62 years old and he died from the impact.
The dark, inescapable irony of the company's owner and savior dying on the very machine that was supposed to revolutionize safe, infallible travel cast a grim, permanent shadow over the entire enterprise.
Wait, let me stop you there because it feels like there's a specific tipping point in this timeline.
Okay.
You have the massive sticker shock, you have the software glitches, you have the bushfall, the Paul Blart mockery, and eventually a tragic fatality. At what exact moment does this string of bad PR transition from a solvable marketing hurdle, something a good ad campaign could fix, into a fatal, inescapable brand identity? Was there a definitive point of no return? The point of no return almost certainly occurred in the window between the 2006 mass recall and the release of Paul Blart in 2009. By the time that film hit theaters and codified the Segway as a joke, the consumer market had already fundamentally rejected the price and the physical limitations. The cultural mockery was simply the final nail in the coffin.
Ensuring that absolutely no new generation of consumers would ever aspire to own one.
Right. And the tragic death of Heselden in 2010 effectively ended any lingering narrative that this was the safe, infallible vehicle of the future. From that point on, Segway was no longer attempting to revolutionize the world, it was simply trying to survive its own legacy.
And that survival required a desperate, chaotic series of corporate maneuvers. The Segway went from a promised revolution to an inherited relic. Let's trace the financial shuffling and the corporate musical chairs that defined the final decade of the original Segway's life.
The executive suite at Segway became a revolving door of crisis management and desperate pivots. Jim Norrod served as CEO from 2005 to 2009, desperately attempting to stem the financial bleeding. In 2007, he orchestrated a fascinating partnership with General Motors. They teamed up to develop a concept called the ENV.
What exactly was the EMV?
It was a pod-shaped, lightweight electric vehicle concept. It essentially took the Segway's dynamic stabilization base and built an enclosed two-seat car shell over it. It was a lifeline, an attempt to pivot the core technology into a format that offered the weather protection, cargo space, and physical safety of a traditional car, addressing all the major consumer complaints.
But the timing was catastrophic.
It was. The 2008 global financial crisis obliterated the auto industry, pushing GM into bankruptcy and instantly killing the ENV project before it could ever reach production.
Following Heselden's tragic death in 2010, the company drifted until it passed to Summit Strategic Investments in 2013. A man named Roger Brown took over as CEO, purchasing the entire company. And this figure is staggering. He bought it for a mere $9 million.
A complete collapse in value.
Let that sink in for a moment. A company that once possessed a pre-launch valuation of $650 million, backed by a $100 million war chest from the smartest money in Silicon Valley, was sold just a decade later for single-digit millions. It lost over 98% of its perceived value.
Under Brown's leadership, Segway survived entirely by abandoning the mass consumer market dream. They stopped trying to change the world and relied solely on institutional and highly specific niche sales. The vehicle found a begrudging, functional home in the security and tourism sectors.
They leaned into the mall cop identity.
They had to. Segway explicitly marketed specialized fleet vehicles, the i2 police package for $5,495 and the all-terrain by 2 police package for $5,895. More than 150 police departments globally adopted them for specific beats, patrolling dense downtown districts, massive airport terminals, and sprawling university campuses where cars couldn't fit but walking was too slow.
And the rest of the company's meager revenue trickled in from bulk sales to tour companies operating novelty fleets in cities like Washington, D.C., Paris, and San Francisco. It survived, but only as a ghost of its former ambition. It was a glorified golf cart for mall cops and tourists.
True. And the bitter end of Segway's independence didn't come from an American competitor. It came from across the globe, driven by the very patent portfolio they had spent so much money and paranoia developing in the first place.
The final chapter is a masterclass in corporate irony. In September 2014, Segway filed a formal complaint with the U.S. International Trade Commission. They were suing a rapidly growing Beijing-based robotics and transportation startup named Ninebot.
Segway accused Ninebot of blatant patent infringement regarding their self-balancing scooter technology, which heavily resembled Segway's designs. Segway's goal was to legally block the import of Ninebot's cheaper, competing scooters into the United States market.
It was a classic legal defense maneuver by a struggling legacy company trying to protect its only remaining asset, its intellectual property. But Ninebot's response to this lawsuit was absolutely stunning.
Instead of engaging in a protracted, expensive legal battle in U.S. courts over patent infringement, Ninebot executed a hostile takeover of a different kind. They simply bought the plaintiff. In April 2015, heavily funded by an $80 million investment round led by the Chinese tech giant Xiaomi and the powerful venture capital firm Sequoia Capital China, Ninebot acquired Segway Inc. outright.
It's the ultimate corporate flex. You sue me for using your patent, so I just buy your entire company.
Exactly. The acquisition granted Ninebot immediate, uncontested access to Segway's vast, highly valuable portfolio of over 400 critical patents regarding dynamic stabilization and battery management. It also gave them Segway's global brand recognition, instantly legitimizing Ninebot and allowing them to freely enter the U.S. market without any legal hurdles.
And once Ninebot had extracted the patents and the brand name, the original machine's days were permanently numbered. The new owners didn't care about a 100-pound, $5,000 behemoth. Which brings us to the final autopsy, July 15th, 2020.
On that specific date, Ninebot officially ceased all production of the Segway personal transporter, the iconic two-wheeled machine that started it all. The financial data released at the very end was bleak, highlighting just how far it had fallen.
The numbers are grim.
Very. Segway president Judy Kai revealed that the PT model accounted for less than 1.5% of the company's total revenue in 2019. Over its nearly 20-year lifetime, from 2001 to 2020, only 140,000 units were sold globally. The discontinuation resulted in 21 employees being laid off at the original Bedford, New Hampshire facility, leaving a skeleton crew of only 5 employees remaining to manage the administrative legacy of the brand.
140,000 units sold over 2 entire decades. Remember, Dean Kamen had promised John Deere he would sell that many units in his first 3 months. But this final failure leads to a sobering, complicated question regarding Segway's true legacy in the modern era.
Right.
Did Segway actually fail? Or, when we look at our city streets today, did Dean Kamen unwittingly fund a $100 million 20-year-long R&D phase that absorbed all the regulatory punishment and safety backlash, solely to pave the way for the multi-billion-dollar e-scooter empires, companies like Bird and Lime that absolutely dominate urban infrastructure right now?
It is a highly critical perspective and arguably the most accurate way to view the company's history. Today, urban micromobility is a booming multi-billion-dollar sector. Electric kick scooters, many of them actually manufactured by Ninebot using miniaturized technology, descended directly from Segway's original patents, have flooded cities worldwide.
They succeeded exactly where the Segway PT failed, because they adapted to the market reality.
Exactly. They're cheap, they're incredibly lightweight, and they utilize a shared rental model enabled by smartphone GPS rather than requiring a commuter to make a $5,000 personal investment and figure out how to store it. Kamen's core visionary thesis that the internal combustion engine is massive overkill for short, 2-mile urban trips, and that humans will eventually rely on small electric computerized platforms to bridge the last mile was entirely historically correct.
He was just 20 years too early.
Yes, he was simply 20 years too early, and his specific execution was far too expensive, too heavy, and too rigid for the market to bear.
Which leaves us with a chilling corporate philosophy to ponder as we close this file. When a genius inventor is handed virtually unlimited resources, $100 million in venture capital, and operates in total paranoid isolation from consumer feedback, is failure guaranteed.
The evidence we've seen today certainly suggests it.
The life and death of the Segway proves that in the modern world, absolute freedom in engineering, completely devoid of market accountability, is a recipe for catastrophic failure. You can build the most perfect, biologically accurate machine in history, but innovation without implementation is just an expensive museum piece. Thank you for joining us on Peak to Dust. Keep questioning the giants of history.